Howdy TPDDL fans and happy Wet Wednesday. As we get ready for spring, we decided that we would talk a little bit about early prep and management of turf practices, and today we have a special guest, Dr. Becky Grubbs, to help us with that topic.
Howdy.
Howdy, thank you so much for being here. So Dr. Grubbs, what can we do to help prep our turf for the growing season?
Okay. So this is a great question, and this is something that a lot of people are starting to think about, especially this year because we've had kind of a mild winter, and so temperatures have been a little warmer. You know, today we're in here, it's like a beautiful 70-degree sunny day outside, so it definitely doesn't feel like early February. So as we get deeper into February, there are kind of a few things to start thinking about with respect to your turf grass. So the first is that we'll start thinking about a fall pre-emergence herbicide if you include herbicides as part of your management program. Not everybody does, but if you do wish to include herbicides, pre-emergence can go a really long way toward reducing the weed pressure that you have in your lawn and also reducing the need for post-emergence herbicides later on in the growing season. So typically for a pre-emergent herbicide, we're looking at putting something out when our soil temperatures reach about 50 to 55 degrees Fahrenheit for 4 or 5 consecutive days. This can also align when we might see red buds blooming, for example. And the reason why we choose this soil temperature is because one of the primary weeds that we base our pre-emergent timing around, which is crabgrass, starts to germinate at about 57 degrees Fahrenheit soil temperature. So we want to get that product out before that weed begins to germinate and similar summer annuals begin to germinate. So a lot of times, depending on where you are in the state of Texas, those soil temperatures could line up with anywhere from mid to late February well into March. And so the further north you go, the later you may be able to push that. If you're further south in the state, you may need to put it out a little bit earlier, and it can fluctuate a lot from year to year. On a year like this year, we also have the option of doing like a split or a sequential application, depending on the type of product that you're using. And when we take that approach, you'll do either a full application or half of your application at a little bit earlier timing, and then follow label recommendations for a second application, usually somewhere between about 6 to 10 weeks later, and you'll just kind of follow product label to see what they say about that. And this just kind of broadens your window of control on a year like this year where we have a lot of fluctuations in our temperatures. Things tend to be a little bit more mild. Some things may be germinating early, but we'll still have other stuff that continues to germinate later. So that's the first thing to start thinking about this time of year. What we'll talk about here in a little bit is we want to make sure with our pre-emergent herbicides, typically for the spring, we're looking for a herbicide alone. So we don't really want to go after a weed and feed product this time of the year because it's really not a great time yet to start putting out fertilizer products. We want to reserve nutrient products, especially quick release nitrogen products, for when our turf grass is actively growing, when we're out there mowing it frequently, and usually that's not going to fall until about April or May. Other things for us to think about at this point in the season are going to be, it can be a good time of year sometime between now and March to get your soil tested for the year. Just going out and collecting 10 or 15 samples to about a 6-inch depth from across your lawn. Some county offices actually allow you to check out a soil probe, which can make this easier on turf grass lawns. And what you'll do is you'll just combine all of those samples into one, fill up one of the soil testing bags that's available at your county office, and ship that into our soil testing lab. If you can get this done, before the end of March, it gives you plenty of time to wait for those results to come back and then to design your nutrient management program around what your turf grass is actually going to need for the year, particularly as it relates to phosphorus and potassium and our micronutrients. We should try to customize those to what our soil test specifies. So that's another thing you can start to think about now. Another thing that we can think about as we move into March and April, is auditing our irrigation system. So a lot of us have an in-ground irrigation system, and as we move into the growing season, a lot of times we have to use that irrigation system in order to maintain our turf the way that we would like. And if we can get in there in the spring and do that audit a little early, it just allows us to check the system and ensure that there's no malfunctions, nothing broken, well before we're going to actually need that system. So we have time to make those repairs and ensure that our system is functioning properly. This helps us to make sure that we're not wasting water, that we're using water efficiently. And also an irrigation audit allows us to determine the precipitation rate for our system. So a lot of our irrigation recommendations are going to be evapotranspiration based, or they're going to be based on the amount of inches of water we need to apply to our turf on a weekly basis. And we won't know how to do that unless we know how long to run our system to put out that number of inches. So determining your precipitation rate will help you do that as well. So that's another good preparation thing to think about. And then the next thing to think about is from a disease standpoint, you know, which is kind of what we'll talk about more here in a minute. But this can be a good time of year to put out some preventative fungicides on lawns that have a history of disease challenges or seem particularly susceptible to disease. Take all root rot, for example, is one that we might recommend both a spring and fall preventative fungicide in lawns that have a history of really dealing with that disease. And so those are things we can think about as well around this time. So that's where I would start with that. The other thing that we can talk about briefly is some of the winter annual weeds that you're seeing right now. So those are probably starting to irritate you. You've probably got some mature henbit and clover and big winter weeds that are starting to bother you. And so those are things I'm starting to get questions about as a specialist. And what I would say is this time of year, as those start to flower and go to seed, if you're able to go out, mow and bag and remove those clippings, it'll help capture that seed and keep it from collecting in your soil. You have the option of mechanically removing those weeds, which once they become mature, some of our herbicide products may not be as effective, and mechanical removal may be the best option. But it just, you know, you can certainly try some of our post-emergence herbicides to control those weeds. Just know that you may not get the results you're looking for, and maybe next year think about a fall pre-emergent herbicide. Putting that out September, October time period, usually soil temperatures around 70 degrees, and getting those weeds a little earlier in the season with a post-emergent herbicide.